Barron Trump, the enigmatic giant of America's most notorious lineage, just stepped into the wildest, most jaw-dropping showdown imaginable, and it's about to set the world on fire. Picture this: a single moment so outrageous, so hilariously explosive, that it's already being called the greatest clash of wills ever witnessed. A rabid Zelensky fan, fueled by obsession and armed with shocking claims, ambushed Barron in a way no one saw coming. What happened next? Something so amazing, so utterly mind-blowing, it'll leave you desperate to know more. Get ready. This is the saga that'll have everyone talking, and the twists will hook you from the very first second. Barron Trump strode through the gleaming expanse of Los Angeles International Airport, a towering figure cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. At 19, he stood an imposing 6'8", his lean frame draped in a tailored gray blazer and dark jeans, his sandy hair swept back with a casual precision that belied his youth. His piercing green eyes scanned the terminal, sharp and alert, a young man who'd grown accustomed to the weight of his name, yet carried it with an effortless grace. He'd flown in from New York on a private jet, landing under the relentless California sun to attend a high-profile tech summit, a rare public outing that had already sparked a flurry of speculation across social media. The air buzzed with the hum of travelers, the clatter of luggage, and the faint whine of jet engines filtering through the glass walls. But Barron moved with purpose, his long strides eating up the distance to the exit. The terminal shimmered with modernity, polished floors reflecting the overhead lights, digital screens flashing flight updates, and a kaleidoscope of faces swirling around him. Businessmen in suits darted past, their briefcases swinging. Families hauled overstuffed bags toward check-in counters, and a smattering of curious onlookers whispered his name, their phones subtly angled to snap a photo of the youngest Trump. Barron's presence was magnetic, a quiet storm drawing eyes without effort, his height and lineage a beacon in the crowd. He adjusted the strap of his leather satchel, his mind already shifting to the summit ahead, a chance to step out of his family's shadow and into a world of innovation he'd quietly studied for years. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. But the atmosphere thickened as he neared the escalators, a ripple of unease threading through the terminal's rhythm. From the edge of the crowd emerged a figure, a man in his late 20s, wiry and intense, his frame swallowed by a faded black jacket emblazoned with a Ukrainian flag across the chest. His dark hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken yet blazing with a fervor that bordered on madness. This was the Zelensky fan, a self-proclaimed crusader whose online rants had earned him a small but rabid following. Tens of thousands who devoured his posts about Ukraine's struggle and America's failures. In his hands, he gripped a thick stack of papers, their edges frayed, as if they'd been clutched through countless sleepless nights. His boots scuffed the floor as he shoved through the throng, his gaze locked on Barron with a predator's focus, his breath quickening with each step. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the brewing collision, their murmurs swelling into a low hum of anticipation. Barron slowed, his head tilting slightly as he registered the man's approach, his instincts sharpening beneath his calm exterior. The Zelensky fan stopped abruptly, planting himself squarely in Barron's path, his chest heaving as he thrust the papers upward like a battle standard. His presence was a jarring note in the terminal's symphony, raw, unpolished, a man who traded civility for conviction. The papers trembled in his grip, a chaotic collage of printed emails, grainy photos, and scrawled notes, each page a piece of his war against the Trump legacy. His eyes burned into Barron, daring him to look away, his body coiled with the energy of a zealot ready to strike. The air crackled as the Zelensky fan began his assault, not with fists, but with a torrent of accusations that spilled from him like venom. He waved the papers wildly, his movements erratic, his voice swallowed by the terminal's din but his intent unmistakable. He pointed at Barron, his finger jabbing the air, then swept his arm toward the crowd, as if summoning them to witness the reckoning. His claims were explosive, allegations that the Trump empire had funneled money into shadowy deals, bolstering forces that crushed Ukraine's resistance, leaving its people to drown in chaos. The words were a Molotov cocktail, lobbed into the heart of the terminal, igniting gasps and stares from the onlookers now forming a loose circle around them. Barron stood motionless, his towering frame a pillar of stillness amid the storm. His green eyes narrowed, tracking the Zelensky fans' every gesture, but his face remained a fortress, cool, unreadable, a mask forged from years of scrutiny. The crowd leaned in, their phones rising like a forest of antennas, live streams flickering to life as the confrontation spread across the internet like wildfire. The Zelensky fan paced, his boots stomping the floor, his papers fluttering as he thrust them toward Barron, demanding he take them, confront them, own the sins he'd pinned to the Trump name. His jacket flapped open, revealing a t-shirt beneath with Zelensky's face emblazoned in bold blue and yellow, a shrine to the leader he'd sworn to avenge. Security stirred at the terminal's edges, their dark uniforms converging slowly, their hands hovering near radios as they assessed the threat. But Barron raised a hand, a subtle, commanding gesture that froze them in place, his authority radiating without a sound. The Zelensky fan seized the pause, stepping closer, his papers brushing Barron's chest as he pressed his attack. His accusations grew wilder, secret meetings, coded transactions, a conspiracy stretching from Mar-a-Lago to Moscow, each claim more outlandish than the last. Sweat beaded on his brow, his voice hoarse from shouting, his fervor a wildfire threatening to consume him whole. The crowd's reaction fractured. Some recoiled, their faces tight with disbelief. Others nodded faintly, drawn into the Zelensky fan's orbit by the sheer force of his passion. Phones trembled in their hands, the livestream spiking as viewers flooded in, X lighting up with hashtags like Barron Busted and Ukraine Truth. Barron's shadow stretched long across the floor, his silhouette a stark contrast to the frantic figure before him. The Zelensky fan dropped to one knee, slamming the papers onto the ground, spreading them out like a map of his obsession. Photos of bombed-out buildings, charts of alleged money trails, a testament to the war he carried within. Then Barron moved. It was deliberate, a slow step forward that shifted the air, his height looming larger as he closed the gap. The Zelensky fan faltered, his hands freezing mid-gesture, his eyes widening as Barron bent slightly, his fingers brushing the edge of the scattered papers. He lifted one, a grainy image of a shattered Ukrainian village, and studied it, his expression unreadable, a quiet storm brewing beneath his calm. The crowd held its breath, the terminal's noise fading to a distant hum, every eye locked on the young Trump as he straightened, the photo still in hand. In a single, fluid motion, Barron tore the paper in half, the rip echoing like a gunshot through the silence. The Zelensky fan flinched, his body jerking as if struck, his face paling as Barron let the pieces flutter to the floor. The gesture was a blade-sharp final, a rejection that needed no words. The crowd erupted, a chaotic burst of gasps and cheers, some shouting in awe, others in outrage, their voices crashing over the terminal like a tidal wave. The Zelensky fan staggered back, his hands clutching his jacket, his crusade crumbling under the weight of Barron's unflinching resolve. Security surged forward now, their hands firm as they closed in on the Zelensky fan, guiding him away from the center of the storm. His eyes stayed locked on Barron, burning with a mix of fury and disbelief, his body limp in their grip as they pulled him toward the exit. The crowd parted, their phones tracking his retreat, the live streams capturing every stumble, every flicker of defeat. Barron turned, his satchel swinging lightly against his hip, and resumed his stride toward the escalators, his back a wall of indifference to the chaos he'd left behind. But the Zelensky fan's gaze lingered, even as he was hustled out of sight, an ember of defiance flickering beneath the humiliation. His papers lay scattered across the floor, trampled by the shifting crowd, a battlefield of his making now abandoned. Barron stepped onto the escalator, his figure ascending above the fray, the terminal's lights glinting off his blazer as he disappeared into the upper level. The confrontation had lasted mere minutes, but its echoes were seismic, spreading across the globe, igniting debates, and planting the seeds of a saga that would test both men in ways neither could foresee. Outside, the Zelensky fan slumped against a concrete pillar, the California sun beating down as security released him with a stern warning. His chest heaved, his hands trembling as he stared at the terminal's glass facade, Barron's towering silhouette a ghost in his mind. The torn photo haunted him, its pieces a symbol of his failure, but also a spark for his next move. Inside, Barron reached the summit's venue, his focus shifting to the future, yet a faint question lingered in his eyes, a curiosity about the man who dared to challenge him, and the fire that might yet rise from the ashes of this tempestuous clash. Barron's hotel suite was a cocoon of luxury, plush carpets, muted lighting, the faint scent of sandalwood lingering in the air, but it offered no comfort tonight. He lay sprawled across the king-sized bed, his towering frame dwarfing the crisp white sheets, his arms folded behind his head. The ceiling stared back, a blank canvas for the chaos swirling in his mind. Sleep was a distant hope, chased away by the Zelensky fan's latest post. Tomorrow, the truth lands. Barron can't run. The words looped in his thoughts, each repetition stoking the ember of defiance that had sparked at the summit. He rolled to his side, reaching for his phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed to life, casting sharp shadows across his face as he reopened X. The hashtag #Barron exposed had climbed higher. The Zelensky fan's photo of the dossier, a blurry stack of papers, now a rallying cry for his followers. Comments flooded in. This is it, the smoking gun. Barron done for. Ukraine deserves justice. But skepticism lingered too, users picking apart the image, questioning its authenticity, mocking its vagueness. Barron's lips pressed into a thin line. The fans' desperation was palpable, but desperation made men dangerous, and Barron knew better than to underestimate a cornered animal. He sat up, swinging his legs over the bed's edge, his bare feet sinking into the carpet. The city sprawled beyond the window, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides. Leaning against the glass, he let the coolness seep into his palms, grounding him as he pieced together his next move. Silence had been his shield at the airport, a refusal to feed the frenzy, but silence wouldn't cut it now, not with proof dangling like bait. He needed to act, to turn the fans' momentum against him, to expose the cracks in his crusade before the narrative hardened into truth. His mind raced, drawing on years of watching his father navigate storms, public, personal, political. Barron had learned early that battles weren't won with noise but with precision, a single strike that left the opponent reeling. The Zelensky fan wanted a spectacle. Barron would give him one, but not the kind he expected. He grabbed a notepad from the desk, scribbling ideas in sharp, angular strokes. A statement, a countermove, a way to flip the script. The pen paused as a plan took shape. Not a defense, but an offense. A challenge that would force the fan to prove his claims or crumble under their weight. Meanwhile, across the city in a motel room that reeked of mildew and cigarette smoke, the Zelensky fan hunched over his dossier, the bed a battlefield of scattered papers. The TV flickered in the corner, its volume low, a late-night comedian's voice droning through punchlines about the airport clash. Barron Trump, tearing up more than just his dad's legacy. The fan didn't laugh. His focus was razor-sharp, his fingers tracing the edges of a printed email, a grainy scan, its text half-redacted but enough to fuel his story. It wasn't perfect, he knew that, but it was something, a thread he'd woven into a tapestry of conspiracy. He leaned back against the headboard, the springs creaking under his weight, and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. Exhaustion gnawed at him, but adrenaline kept it at bay, a restless energy that thrummed through his veins. His phone sat beside him, its screen alive with notifications, hundreds of retweets, messages from supporters urging him on, a few threats from Trump loyalists that he dismissed with a scoff. His post about the dossier had lit a match, and the fire was spreading. his followers amplifying every word, every image into a digital roar. He picked up the phone, scrolling through the responses, his chest tightening with a mix of pride and dread. A new message caught his eye from a username he recognized, a key figure in his online circle, someone who'd fed him tips before. "Summit, got extra security tomorrow, be ready." He frowned, the words sinking in. Barron wasn't running, he was digging in, fortifying his position. The fan's jaw clenched, his resolve hardening. Good. Let Barron hide behind guards and glass walls. It wouldn't save him from the truth. He turned back to the dossier, flipping through its pages with renewed urgency. Public records of Trump family dealings, snippets of news articles, his own handwritten notes connecting dots that might not exist. It was a mess, but it was his mess, his weapon. He pulled out a marker, circling key phrases, underlining dates, building a narrative he could hurl at the summit like a Molotov cocktail. His plan was simple: show up, deliver the dossier, demand answers. The crowd would do the rest, their phones turning his stunt into a viral reckoning. Back at the hotel, Barron finished his notes, the notepad now a roadmap of intent. He set it aside and stood, stretching his arms overhead, his muscles tensing then relaxing as he shook off the day's weight. He crossed to the minibar, pulling out a bottle of water and drank deeply, the cold liquid steadying his pulse. His phone buzzed again, his security team confirming tomorrow's logistics, but he let it sit unanswered. He didn't need protection. He needed control, and that came from within, from the quiet certainty he'd inherited and honed. He returned to the window, his reflection a ghost against the cityscape. The Zelensky fan thought he held the upper hand, but Barron saw the flaw in his game: obsession. It blinded him, drove him to overreach, to gamble everything on a shaky foundation. Barron wouldn't match his noise with noise. He'd let the fan's own momentum bury him. Tomorrow, when the dossier landed, Barron would be ready, not with denials, but with questions, a mirror held up to the fans' claims until they cracked under scrutiny. The Zelensky fan stuffed the dossier into his backpack, the papers crinkling as he forced the zipper shut. He stood, packing the cramped room, his boots thudding against the worn carpet. The TV flickered to a news channel, a pundit dissecting the summit's guest list, Barron's name a recurring beat. The fan paused, his eyes narrowing as the screen flashed a clip of Barron at the airport, tall, composed, tearing the photo with a flick of his wrist. Rage flared, but he swallowed it, channeling it into focus. Tomorrow wasn't about anger. It was about victory, about making Barron feel the weight of the world he'd ignored. He sank onto the bed, his phone in hand, and typed one last post for the night. Barron's summit won't be a safe space. Truth doesn't negotiate. He hit send, watching the likes climb, his followers' fervor a chorus that drowned out the doubt creeping at the edges of his mind. He lay back, staring at the stained ceiling, the dossier beside him like a talisman. Sleep tugged at him, but he resisted, replaying his plan until it was ironclad, a script for the chaos he'd unleash. Barron switched off the suite's lights, the room plunging into shadow save for the city's glow seeping through the curtains. He climbed back into bed, his body still, his mind a chessboard where every piece was in place. The Zelensky fan storm was coming, but Barron wasn't the prey, he was the predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the night deepened, Lowe's angels thrummed below, a city oblivious to the collision brewing in its heart, a clash of wills that would leave only one standing when the dust settled. Barron Trump settled into his seat at the summit's round table, the sleek chair creaking faintly under his weight as the buzz of the confrontation lingered in the air. The glass and steel hall pulsed with renewed energy. The crowd's attention split between the stage and the towering young man who just turned a public ambush into a masterclass in control. His charcoal blazer hung sharp against his frame, the California sunlight streaming through the venue's towering windows glinting off the polished table before him. The dossier's pages, scattered remnants of the Zelensky fans' failed crusade, lay forgotten on the floor, trampled underfoot as the summit churned back to life. His phone rested face up beside him, its screen a flickering storm of notifications. X was ablaze. Barron wins trended alongside clips of the fans' defeat, the viral moment replayed in endless loops. Barron's calm question, "Is that all?" cutting deeper with each view. The crowd's roar still echoed in his ears, a wave of approval that had drowned the fans' desperation. Yet Barron's expression remained a mask of focus, his green eyes fixed on the speaker at the podium, his mind already racing beyond the victory. He knew the Zelensky fan wouldn't vanish quietly. Obsession like that didn't break. It bent, it hardened, it waited. Outside, the Zelensky fan slumped on a concrete bench, the summit's glass fortress looming behind him like a taunting mirage. His black jacket was unzipped, the Ukrainian flag on his chest faded and creased, a symbol battered by his failure. The remnants of the dossier spilled across his lap, crumpled pages, smeared ink, a grainy photo of rubble fluttering in the breeze. His hands trembled as he tried to stack them, the cheap plastic folder long gone, discarded in the chaos of his ejection. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket, a cruel chorus of mockery and pity from followers who'd once cheered his cause. He didn't look, couldn't bear to see the hashtags carving his defeat into stone. Dossier flop, #Zelensky fool. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest tight with a cocktail of rage and shame. Barron's words replayed in his mind, each one a splinter under his skin. This isn't proof. It's a story, a bad one. The dismissal had been surgical, stripping his months of work to nothing in front of a live audience. He clenched a fist, crumpling a page, a timeline of alleged Trump deals in Ukraine, until it was a tight ball in his palm. The crowd's cheers still rang in his ears, a sound that mocked him as he sat alone, the summit's hum muffled by the glass doors that had slammed shut on his crusade. But something shifted in him as he stared at the mess in his lap. The fire that had driven him here, the sleepless nights, the forged badge, the reckless gamble flared hotter, fueled by humiliation. Barron had won the battle, turned the dossier into a punchline, but the war wasn't over. The fans' jaw tight, his eyes narrowing as a new plan flickered to life. He wouldn't come back with paper next time. No, he'd dig deeper, find something undeniable, something Barron couldn't dismiss with a flick of his wrist. He shoved the pages into his backpack, the weight lighter now, but his resolve heavier than ever. Inside, Barron leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the table as the keynote speaker wrapped up. The room applauded, a polite ripple that barely registered with him. His mind was elsewhere on the fan on the next move. He'd seen the look in the man's eyes before security dragged him out, wild, unhinged, but unbroken. Barron knew that kind of determination. It was a mirror to his own, though he'd never admit it. The fan's obsession was a loose thread, and Barron didn't leave loose threads dangling. He glanced at his phone again, swiping through the flood of messages. A text from an aide blinked at the top. "Security says he's still outside. Want him tailed." Barron hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. Tailing him might escalate things, give the fan more fuel to cry persecution. No, he'd let him stew, let the defeat sink in. If the fan came back, Barron would be ready, his counter already forming like a chess move plotted in silence. He typed a quick reply, "Leave it. He'll show himself again." The summit rolled on, the crowd shifting to breakout sessions, their chatter a dull roar. Barron stood, his height drawing eyes as he moved toward a quieter corner of the hall. He paused by a window, gazing out at the Los Angeles skyline, the sprawl of ambition and chaos that mirrored his world. Below, he spotted the fan on the bench, a dark speck against the concrete, hunched over his backpack like a soldier guarding a fallen flag. Barron's lips twitched, not quite a smile, something colder, sharper. The fan thought he'd lost everything, but Barron knew better. He just handed his enemy a reason to fight harder. Outside, the Zelensky fan rose from the bench, his boots scuffing the pavement as he slung the backpack over his shoulder. The sun beat down, casting his shadow long and thin, a distorted echo of the man he'd been hours ago. He turned away from the summit, his steps unsteady but deliberate, his mind churning with fragments of a new strategy. Barron's victory stung, a wound that bled defiance. He muttered under his breath a promise to the air. "Next time, Trump. Next time you'll bleed." The glass doors of the venue reflected his retreat, a fleeting image swallowed by the city's glare. Inside, Barron turned from the window, his silhouette cutting through the light as he rejoined the summit's flow. The dossier drop was over, its echoes rippling across the digital sphere, but the game had just begun. Two forces, calm and chaos, strategy and obsession, circled each other, their collision inevitable, their stakes higher than ever. The first rays of dawn painted the Los Angeles skyline in hues of gold and pink, but beneath the city's shimmering surface, a storm was brewing. Dmitry Volkov, the Zelensky fan, sat in his dingy motel room, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the cracked screen of his laptop. The email to the journalist, a young, ambitious reporter named Lena Torres at a progressive news outlet, had been sent. The attachment, a grainy scan of a financial document linking a Trump-branded shell company to a Russian oligarch, sat heavy in his mind. It wasn't definitive proof of Barron Trump's corruption, but it was a spark, and Dmitry intended to fan it into a wildfire. He leaned back in the creaky chair, the springs groaning under his weight, and rubbed his temples. The room was suffocating, stale air, peeling wallpaper, the faint buzz of a dying fluorescent light, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were a chaotic swirl of hope and dread. What if Torres dismissed it as a hoax? What if she traced it back to him? He'd used a burner account, routed through a VPN, but he wasn't a tech wizard. Doubt gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. This was his shot, a chance to force Barron into the open, to make the world see what he saw, a dynasty built on lies. Miles away in the penthouse suite of a gleaming downtown hotel, Barron Trump stood by the window, his reflection sharp against the glass. The city sprawled below him, a chessboard where he held the upper hand, or so he believed. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him, and he turned to check it. A message from his cybersecurity contact, terse and to the point. Found chatter. Possible leak tied to Ukraine. Working on source. Stand by. Barron's eyes narrowed. Dmitry was moving faster than he'd expected, and the mention of Ukraine set his nerves on edge. He crossed the room to his laptop, pulling up the thin file his security team had compiled on Dmitry Volkov. Ukrainian-American, 34, no family, a string of minor arrests at protests. A zealot, not a mastermind, but zealots could be dangerous, especially with the right ammunition. Barron's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the desk. He told his team to dig deeper, to find leverage, debts, vices, anything to discredit the man. But so far, they'd come up empty. If Dmitry had something real, Barron needed to know what it was and how to bury it. The morning ticked by, tension coiling tighter in both men's worlds. In her cramped apartment on the city's east side, Lena Torres sipped her third cup of coffee, scrolling through her inbox. The anonymous email caught her eye, subject line, "Trump secrets you can't ignore." She snorted softly. Crackpot tips were a dime a dozen. But curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. The document loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until the details sharpened. A wire transfer, $2.3 million from Triumph Ventures LLC, to an account linked to Viktor Kuznetsov, a sanctioned oligarch with a trail of rumors tying him to Ukraine's war-torn east. Her pulse quickened. If this checked out, it was a bombshell. Lena grabbed her phone, texting her editor. "Got a lead. Big. Need to verify ASAP." She didn't wait for a reply, diving into public records and leaked databases, cross-referencing names and dates. The deeper she dug, the more the pieces fit, though not perfectly. Triumph Ventures was a known Trump entity, but the paper trail was murky, layered with shell companies and dead ends. Still, it was enough to run with, enough to ask questions that Barron Trump couldn't dodge. Back at the motel, Dmitry's phone buzzed, a news alert he'd set for any mention of Trump. His heart skipped as he read the headline from Tor's outlet. Exclusive. Documents suggest Trump ties to Russian funds amid Ukraine conflict. The story was live, sparse on details but dripping with implication. He exhaled a shaky breath, a mix of triumph and terror washing over him. It was out there now, unstoppable. He pictured Barron's face, that smug confidence cracking as the story spread. Barron saw it moments later, his phone lighting up with notifications as X erupted. Trump Russia trended alongside Dmitry Truth, the internet a feeding frenzy of speculation and memes. He stood frozen, the air in the suite suddenly too thin. His team burst into the room, a flurry of voices, damage control, legal options, counter-statements, but Barron silenced them with a raised hand. "Get me the full story," he said, his voice ice-cold. "Every word, and find out who broke it." The security chief nodded, already on his phone, while Barron turned back to the window. The city glittered, indifferent to the chaos unfolding in his name. He replayed Dmitri's words from the summit. "You can't hide forever." The fan had landed a blow, sloppy but effective. Barron's mind raced. Denials would fuel the fire, silence would look like guilt. He needed a counterstrike, something to flip the narrative. His cybersecurity contact's warning echoed, a leak tied to Ukraine. If Dmitri had more, this was just the beginning. In the motel, Dmitri paced, adrenaline surging. The story was a spark, but he needed to keep the pressure on. He reopened his laptop, drafting another message to Viper. "It worked. Need more. Anything you've got." He hit send, his hands shaking, not from fear now, but from the thrill of the fight. He'd drawn blood, and he wasn't stopping until Barron's empire bled out. Barron, meanwhile, sat with his team, the Tor's article projected on a screen. "It's thin," the PR lead said. "No hard proof. We can call it a fabrication, sue for defamation." Barron shook his head. "Not yet. We discredit the source first. Dig into this journalist, her biases, her history, and Volkov, find out where he's getting this. Someone's feeding him." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with resolve. Dmitri wanted a war. Barron would give him one he couldn't win. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like, and let's keep going." As the sun climbed higher, Los Angeles hummed with its usual rhythm. Traffic, ambition, the pulse of a city that thrived on drama. But for Dmitri and Barron, the day was a battlefield, each move a step closer to victory or ruin. The leaked document had lit the fuse, and now the explosion loomed, inevitable and devastating. Their clash was no longer a shadow game. It was public, personal, and poised to consume them both. Barron Trump stood motionless by the window of his hotel suite, the Los Angeles skyline shimmering below like a mirage of power and promises. The torn fragments of Dmitri Volkov's latest document lay scattered on the floor behind him, a silent accusation he couldn't fully dismiss. His fingers tightened around his phone, the screen's glow illuminating the sharp planes of his face as he reread the message from his cybersecurity lead. "Trace the leak. It's internal. Someone's feeding him." The words hit like a physical blow, a crack in the foundation of the empire he'd been trained to protect. A mole. Someone within his inner circle, someone he'd trusted, was slipping secrets to Dmitri, fueling this relentless assault. His mind churned, sifting through faces and names. His advisors, his security team, the handful of confidants who knew the Trump family's inner workings. Who had the access? Who had the motive? He crossed the room in long, deliberate strides, his polished shoes silent against the carpet, and sat at the desk. With a flick of his wrist, he opened his laptop, pulling up encrypted files, personnel records, meeting logs, anything that might reveal a pattern. His green eyes narrowed, scanning the data with the precision of a predator stalking prey. He wouldn't wait for his team to find the traitor. He'd hunt them himself. The message he'd sent earlier to his contact, the fixer, lingered in his thoughts. Sergei Petrov. The name from Dmitri's document gnawed at him. A shadowy figure tied to his father's past, a man who'd brokered deals in Eastern Europe before disappearing into obscurity. Barron's fingers paused over the keyboard. He'd always assumed the family's history was a labyrinth of calculated risks, not a graveyard of buried sins. But now doubt crept in, a cold whisper questioning everything he'd been taught to defend. He leaned back, his jaw tight, and resolved to unearth the truth about Petrov, about the mole, about the legacy he carried. Dmitri might have started this fire, but Barron would control how it burned. Meanwhile, across the city, Dmitri Volkov emerged from the dim bar into the cool night air, the mysterious envelope tucked inside his jacket. His breath clouded in front of him, his steps unsteady from vodka and adrenaline as he moved through the shadows of a narrow alley. The stranger's offer replayed in his mind, a promise of evidence, hard and undeniable, to bury Barron once and for all. But the cost lingered, unspoken yet heavy, a debt he'd owe to a man whose flinty eyes held no loyalty. Dmitri's hand brushed the envelope, its edges sharp against his chest. He didn't trust the stranger, but he trusted Barron less. He ducked into a doorway, pulling out his phone to check the encrypted app he used to rally his online followers. The latest leak had ignited a storm, hashtags trending, forums buzzing, the public's hunger for scandal growing ravenous. But it wasn't enough. Barron's team was already spinning the narrative, painting Dmitri as a reckless fanatic, a Ukrainian agitator with a grudge. He needed more than documents now. He needed a spectacle, something Barron couldn't dismiss with a press release or a shredded page. His fingers tightened around the phone as an idea took root, a public strike, bold and unignorable, to force Barron into the open. The envelope beckoned. He slid it out, tearing it open with a quick, decisive rip. Inside was a single USB drive, small and unmarked, its surface glinting in the streetlight. No note, no instructions, just the weight of possibility. Dmitri's pulse quickened. Whatever was on it, it was his next weapon, and he'd wield it with precision. He pocketed the drive and slipped back into the night, his mind racing with plans. A video release, a live stream, a confrontation that would strip Barron's mask of control and expose the rot beneath. Back at the hotel, Barron's phone buzzed again, jolting him from his work. Another update from his team narrowed it to 3 possibles, checking financials now. 3 names flashed in his mind, loyalists he'd never suspected, now potential betrayers. He stood, packing the suite, his tall frame casting a restless shadow across the walls. The summit loomed tomorrow, a high-profile event where he'd face the press and the world, his composure a shield against Dmitri's chaos. But the mole changed everything. Every word he spoke, every move he made, could be feeding the enemy. He stopped, his gaze falling on the torn document again. Petrov's name stared back, a thread he couldn't ignore. He grabbed his phone and typed a new message to the fixer. Addendum, cross-check Petrov with internal staff. Any overlap, flag it. If the mole was connected to Petrov, it wasn't just a leak, it was a vendetta, decades in the making. Barron's chest tightened, a rare flicker of unease breaking through his calm. He'd always played the game with confidence, but now the board was shifting, and the pieces were no longer his to command. The alley, Dmitri reached a rusted payphone, a relic he used to avoid tracking. He plugged the USB into a burner laptop he'd stashed nearby, his breath catching as files loaded, audio clips, grainy footage, emails with timestamps stretching back years. His eyes widened, a grin tugging at his lips. This wasn't just dirt, it was dynamite. Transactions, voices, faces, proof that tied the Trump name to deals he could barely comprehend. The stranger had delivered, and Dmitri's gamble was paying off. But as he scrolled, a single frame froze him, a blurred image of a man he recognized, not from Barron's circle, but from Kiev, from his own past. A cold sweat broke across his brow. The stranger wasn't just helping him, he was steering him, and Dmitri was no longer sure who held the reins. He yanked the USB out, his hands trembling, and vanished into the night, the weight of his discovery pulling him deeper into a game he might not survive. The city hummed on, its lights a deceptive calm over the brewing storm. Barron and Dmitri, hunter and hunted, circled each other in the dark, their paths converging on a collision neither could avoid. By dawn, the first sparks would fly, and Lowe's angels would wake to a reckoning. Dmitri Volkov swirled the cheap vodka in his glass, the dim light of the bar casting shadows across his tired face. The phone sat on the sticky table in front of him, its screen glowing with the cryptic message. "You failed to deliver. Meet me at the docks midnight. We have another play." His stomach churned, not from the alcohol, but from the realization that he was no longer fully in control. The broker, or whoever this shadowy figure was, had him on a leash, and the aborted hack at the summit only tightened the collar. He replayed the moment in his mind, the screens flickering to life with his voice, the gasps from the crowd, and then nothing. Barron's team had been faster, smarter. The evidence he'd fought so hard to uncover had barely made a ripple before being snuffed out. Worse, the glimpse he'd caught of the Ukrainian names in those files gnawed at him. Oleksandr Yatsenko, a man he'd once toasted as a patriot, tangled up in the same filth as the Trumps. It was a bitter pill, one that made his crusade feel less righteous and more like a wrecking ball swinging blindly. Dmitry glanced at the clock above the bar, 11:15 p.m. The docks were a 20-minute drive and he had no choice but to go. The broker had dangled the promise of another play, and despite the unease creeping up his spine, Dmitry needed to know what it was. He downed the rest of his drink, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction, and grabbed his jacket. As he stepped into the cool night air, he muttered to himself, "This ends on my terms, not theirs." Meanwhile, Barron Trump stood backstage at the summit venue, the echoes of applause still ringing in his ears. The crowd had bought his improvised recovery, but he knew the truth. He dodged a bullet, not a cannonball. Dmitry's stunt had been sloppy, incomplete, but it proved the man was relentless. And Marcus's confession earlier that evening had cracked something inside Barron. Trust, once a given, now felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. He turned to his cybersecurity chief, Lena Voss, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. "What did we miss?" he asked, his voice tight. Lena adjusted her glasses, her fingers tapping on a tablet. The hack was routed through a proxy in Eastern Europe, likely Ukraine. We caught it midstream, but he got enough out there to stir whispers. People saw snippets, emails, names. Nothing concrete enough to stick, but the damage is in the perception. Barron rubbed his temples. "And Marcus?" "He's cooperating," Lena said. "He gave us the broker's alias and the summit plan. Claims he doesn't know the full scope, but I've got him under surveillance. If he moves, we'll know." Barron nodded, though the weight of Marcus's betrayal still pressed on him. The man had been at every family dinner, every milestone, and now he was a liability. "Keep digging into this broker," Barron said. "If he's tied to Petrov or some oligarch, I want to know who's pulling the strings. And find out what Volkov's got left. He's not done." Lena hesitated, then added, "There's something else. The data we intercepted before we killed the feed mentioned Kiev. Ukrainian officials, not just our people. If Volkov releases that, it's not just us in the crosshairs." Barron's eyes darkened. "Then he's playing with fire he doesn't understand. Get me everything you can before sunrise." As Lena hurried off, Barron pulled out his phone and dialed his chief of staff. "Double security for the next 48 hours, he ordered. "Volkov's desperate, and desperate men don't stop." He hung up, staring at the blank screen. The game had shifted, and for the first time he felt the ground beneath him tremble. The docks were a maze of rusted shipping containers and flickering sodium lights, the air thick with the tang of salt and oil. Dmitry arrived at 11:58 p.m., his boots crunching on gravel as he scanned the shadows. A foghorn blared in the distance, masking the sound of approaching footsteps until a figure emerged from behind a stack of crates. The man was tall, lean, dressed in a dark coat that blended with the night. His face was obscured by a hood, but his voice was sharp, accented, Eastern European, maybe Russian. "You're late," he said. Dmitry bristled. "I'm here, what's this other play?" The broker, assuming this was him, stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "Your stunt at the summit was amateur. You showed your hand too soon, and now Trump's team is scrambling, but we can still win." "Win what?" Dmitry snapped. "I'm not your puppet. I want the truth out, not some chess game." The broker chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Truth? You think this is about truth? It's about power. Barron Trump's empire is a house of cards and you're the wind, but you need direction." Dmitry's fists clenched. "Get to the point." The broker reached into his coat and produced a small envelope. New evidence. Audio recordings Trump SR himself negotiating with Petrov's men. Undeniable. Release this and no cybersecurity team can spin it away. Dmitry took the envelope, his pulse quickening. "Why me? What's in it for you?" The broker's eyes glinted beneath the hood. "Let's just say I represent interests that benefit from chaos in the Trump orbit. You're a means to an end, Volkov. Don't overestimate your role. The words stung, but Dmitry held his tongue. He tore open the envelope, finding a tiny flash drive inside. How do I know this isn't more lies? You don't, the broker said, but you'll listen to it and you'll act because you can't walk away now. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing Trump knows about Marcus. Your mole's burned. Next time you're on your own. Before Dmitry could respond, the broker melted into the shadows, leaving him alone with the flash drive and 1,000 questions. He gripped it tightly, the weight of his choices pressing down harder than ever. Back at the Summit Hotel, Barron stood on the balcony of his suite, the city sprawling beneath him. His phone buzzed Lena again. "We've got movement," she said. Volkov was spotted leaving a bar heading toward the docks. No visuals yet, but we're tracking. Barron's grip tightened on the railing. He's meeting someone, the broker maybe. Get a team down there discreetly. I want eyes on him. Already on it, Lena replied. And Marcus just got a call. He's nervous, might be planning to run. Let him, Barron said coldly. He's a loose end now. Focus on Volkov. Whatever he's got, we end it before it spreads. He hung up, staring out at the horizon. The summit had been a battleground, but this was war. Dmitry thought he could topple the Trump name, but Barron wasn't his father. He wouldn't crumble under pressure. He'd fight, and he'd win. The night deepened, and at the docks, Dmitry plugged the flash drive into his phone, slipping in earbuds. The audio crackled to life. A familiar voice, Donald Trump's, haggling over percentages with a man whose accent matched Petrov's crew. It was raw, unfiltered, damning. Dmitry's heart raced. This was it, the kill shot. But as the recording ended, a quieter voice in his head whispered doubts. The broker's motives, the Ukrainian ties, the cost of it all. He pulled out the earbuds, staring at the flash drive. Midnight had passed, and with it, any chance of turning back. Dmitry Volkov stumbled out of the Roosevelt Hotel, the night air biting at his skin as he clutched the laptop bag to his chest. His mind was a storm, anger, doubt, and betrayal swirling together in a chaotic mess. The weight of Barron Trump's words pressed down on him. The broker's using you, release them, and you'll burn your own heroes along with my family. The folder Barron had shoved into his hands felt like a live grenade, its contents threatening to explode everything he'd believed in. He needed air, space, something to anchor him before he made a choice that could unravel nations. He ducked into an alley beside the hotel, leaning against the damp brick wall. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pulled out the folder again, flipping through the documents under the faint glow of a streetlight. The emails were cryptic but damning, orders from the broker to an unknown recipient, instructing them to feed Volkov the Kyiv recordings and keep him focused on the Trumps. There were bank transfers too, linking the broker to accounts Dmitry recognized from his own investigations, accounts tied to oligarchs who'd profited from Ukraine's turmoil. And then the photo. A grainy shot of the broker meeting with a man whose face was obscured, but whose silhouette Dmitry knew too well, Oleksandr Achritsenko. His stomach churned. Achritsenko, the man who'd once promised to rebuild Ukraine, was entangled in the same web as the Trumps. Dmitry's mission had been clear, expose the American corruption tainting his homeland. But now the truth was a double-edged sword, cutting through both the enemy he despised and the ideals he'd clung to. He slammed the folder shut, his fist trembling. The broker had played him, dangled the audio like bait, knowing Dmitry's hatred would blind him to the bigger picture. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his spiral. A text from an unknown number. "You're running out of time, Volkov. Deliver the audio or we'll take it from you." The broker or one of his lackeys, Dmitry's grip tightened on the phone. They were watching him, waiting for him to crack. He glanced back at the hotel, half expecting to see Barron's security team closing in. But the street was empty, the silence deafening. Meanwhile, inside room 404, Barron Trump paced the suite, his calm facade crumbling now that Dmitry was gone. He'd played his hand, revealing the broker's duplicity, offering a fragile truce, but he wasn't sure it had worked. Dmitry was a wild card, driven by a fury Barron could only partly understand. He'd seen the flicker of doubt in the man's eyes, but doubt wasn't enough. If Dmitry released the audio, the fallout would be catastrophic, not just for the Trump family, but for Barron's own fragile hold on their legacy. He pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security, a gruff ex-Marine named Kessler. "Where is he?" Barron asked, skipping pleasantries. "Left the hotel 2 minutes ago," Kessler replied, his voice clipped. "He's in the alley east of the building. Looks shaken." "Keep eyes on him, but don't engage," Barron ordered. "If he makes a move to upload anything, we intervene." "Understood. What about the broker?" Barron hesitated. The broker was the real threat, a shadow pulling strings from Moscow to Manhattan. "I've got a lead on his location. If Volkov doesn't bite, we'll pivot. Get me everything you can on those Kyiv accounts, names, dates, anything that ties them to Tretsenko." "On it," Kessler said, and the line went dead. Barron sank into the chair, running a hand through his hair. He'd spent years distancing himself from his father's chaos, building a reputation as the rational one, the fixer. But this mess was dragging him back into the muck, forcing him to confront truths he'd rather bury. The audio was real. He couldn't deny that. His father's voice, brash and unapologetic, echoed in his mind. But the broker's game was bigger, and Barron wasn't about to let some faceless manipulator bring down everything he'd fought to protect. Back in the alley, Dmitry made his decision. He couldn't trust Barron, not fully, but the broker's betrayal was a wound too fresh to ignore. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keys. The audio file stared back at him, a digital Pandora's box. One upload and the world would hear it all. Trump's deals, Tretsenko's complicity, the whole rotten truth. But Barron's warning gnawed at him. "You'll hand that power to the very people you claim to hate." He switched to a secure messaging app instead, typing a new message to a contact he hadn't used in months, a Ukrainian journalist named Olna, one of the few he still trusted. "I've got something big, audio of Trump and Tretsenko in a Kyiv deal, but it's compromised. Need your help verifying it. Meet me at the usual spot, midnight." He hit send, then deleted the draft of the public upload he'd prepared. He wasn't ready to pull the trigger, not yet. As he slipped the laptop back into his bag, a shadow moved at the end of the alley. Dmitry froze, his hand sliding to the knife in his pocket. A figure stepped into the light, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face hidden by a hood. "Volkov," the man said, his voice low and accented. "You're late." Dmitry's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The man pulled back his hood, revealing a scarred face and cold eyes. "The broker sends his regards. Hand over the drive or we do this the hard way." Dmitry tightened his grip on the knife, his mind racing. The broker wasn't waiting for him to decide. They were coming to take it all. He glanced at the hotel, wondering if Barron's team was close enough to intervene, then back at the man advancing toward him. Time was up. Dmitry Volkov stumbled backward, his boots scraping against the alley's grimy pavement as the broker's agent advanced. The man's scarred face was a mask of cold intent, his hand slipping inside his coat for what Dmitry knew was a weapon. Panic surged through him. He was no fighter, just a man with a cause and a laptop full of dangerous secrets. His fingers fumbled for the knife in his pocket, but it felt pitifully small against the threat looming before him. "You don't have to do this," Dmitry rasped, his voice trembling. "I haven't released anything yet." The agent's lips curled into a sneer. "Too late, Volkov. You're a loose end now." He lunged, and Dmitry braced for the impact, but it never came. A sharp crack split the air, and the agent crumpled to the ground, clutching his knee. Behind him, two figures in dark suits emerged from the shadows, their guns drawn. Barron's security team. Dmitry exhaled a shaky breath, his legs nearly buckling with relief. Kessler, Barron's head of security, stepped forward, his face grim. "You're coming with us," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Dmitry nodded, too stunned to resist. As they hustled him into an unmarked SUV, he glanced back at the alley where the agent lay groaning. The broker's reach was long, but Barron was longer, and for now, that was enough to keep him alive. 30 minutes later, Dmitri sat on a bench in a quiet park, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. Barron stood a few feet away, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dew-soaked grass. The air was cool, the city still asleep, and for a moment the world felt suspended between night and day, truth and lies. "You saved me," Dmitri said, his voice hoarse. "Why?" Barron's gaze was steady, his green eyes unreadable. "Because you're more useful alive than dead, and because the broker, not done with either of us." Dmitri clenched his fists, the weight of the laptop bag still slung over his shoulder. "You think I'll just hand over the audio now, after everything?" Barron shook his head. "No, I think you'll do what you came here to do, expose the truth. But I'm asking you to do it smart, not for me but for yourself." Dmitri's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Barron stepped closer, his voice low. "The broker played us both. He wanted chaos and he almost got it. But if you release that audio without context, you'll take down more than just my family. You'll drag your own people through the mud. Atritsenko, the others, they're not clean. You know that now." Dmitri's jaw tightened. The folder Barron had given him still burned in his mind, the evidence of his homeland's corruption undeniable. "So what? I should bury it. Let you walk away." "No," Barron said. "You should use it, but not like this." He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen before holding it out. "I've got a contact, a journalist, impartial. She'll help you verify everything piece by piece. No spin, no agenda, just the facts." Dmitri stared at the phone, suspicion warring with desperation. "Why would you help me?" "Because I'd rather control the fire than watch it burn everything," Barron replied. "And because I know what it's like to fight for something bigger than yourself." For the first time, Dmitri saw a flicker of vulnerability in Barron's eyes, a glimpse of the weight he carried, the legacy he hadn't chosen but was bound to defend. Slowly, Dmitri took the phone, glancing at the contact's name. Elena Ramirez, investigative reporter. He recognized her work, fair, unflinching, respected. It wasn't the knockout blow he dreamed of, but it was a path to the truth, untainted by the broker's manipulations. "Fine," Dmitri said, his voice steadying. "But if she finds what I think she will, your family's done. You know that, right?" Barron's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Maybe, or maybe we'll both learn something." 2 weeks later, the story broke, not as a viral stunt or a hacked summit, but as a meticulously sourced exposé in a major newspaper. The headline was stark: "Trump ties to Ukraine, a web of corruption spanning continents." The article laid bare the dealings, Trump's, Atritsenko's, the oligarchs, each thread unraveled with precision. It wasn't the bombshell Dmitri had envisioned, but it was the truth, raw and unvarnished. The fallout was immediate. Protests erupted outside Trump properties, calls for investigations echoed across Capitol Hill, and in Kyiv, Atritsenko's allies scrambled to distance themselves. Barron watched it all from his office, the city's skyline framed by the window behind him. His phone buzzed with updates, legal teams mobilizing, PR spinning damage control, but he felt strangely calm. The empire would survive, bruised but standing. He'd played the game and won, not by burying the truth, but by letting it breathe. Across the city, Dmitri sat in a small cafe, nursing a coffee as he read the article for the 10th time. The victory felt hollow. He'd exposed the rot, but it hadn't brought the clarity he'd craved. Ukraine's wounds ran deeper than he'd imagined, and his own heroes had feet of clay. Still, he'd done what he set out to do. The world knew, and that was something. His phone buzzed, a message from Olna, his journalist contact in Kyiv. "Good work, but there's more to uncover." "You in?" Dmitri hesitated, then typed a single word. "Yes." The fight wasn't over, it had just begun. In the quiet of the park, weeks earlier, Barron and Dmitri had parted ways with a nod, two men shaped by different worlds, bound by a shared reckoning. As Barron walked back to his waiting car, the sun rising behind him, he glanced over his shoulder. Dmitri was already gone, a shadow slipping into the dawn. They'd never be allies, but in that moment, they'd found something rarer: respect. The game was over, but the echoes of their clash would ripple through history, a testament to the cost of truth and the price of power. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll never miss our newest uploads.